For the past couple of years, I've said that the culture war, whatever you want to call it, is going to escalate. And who knows? People might look back in 100 years, and this could be the dawn of a new civil war, as some people have called it. The rhetoric has been flying around quite a bit. Even recently, people have been talking about the potential for a second civil war. I think that's a bit too hyperbolic. I don't know what you could call what's happening, but maybe complete social upheaval, massive change, who knows? There's a lot of people who go around saying empires only last a few hundred years. I don't believe that's actually true, but people talk about it. I want to talk about some of the issues that I believe are causing and caused by this rapid transformation we're seeing in society. We're seeing news media collapse. We're seeing the spread of new technology. Social media is dramatically changing how things function. And it's resulting in this weird tribalism. One of the things I want to highlight today specifically is how the media exists in two realities. And they probably know, but don't seem to care. And what ends up happening is then you have the right and the left, however you want to break up the two, larger factions, where they see the same screen with two different movies, to quote Scott Adams, or to paraphrase Scott Adams, which we'll go over that too. But this, I want to talk about this because I saw this tweet from Eric Weinstein, who said, in 2001, I began to believe that the financial world was coming apart and started giving talks, but it didn't year after year. Around 2005, I lost my conviction waiting. He says, at NN Talib told me to stick it out, but I lost my nerve. In 2019, I think the political world is coming apart. And what exactly does that mean, the political world is coming apart? Well, what's interesting about Eric Weinstein's tweet, and he does go on to elaborate, is that in 2008, we know the financial world did face, we were hit by the Great Recession. Something did happen, and it was devastating to a lot of people. We're still here. The world carries on. So I want to make sure that when we talk about whatever it is that's coming in the escalation of the culture war, a lot of people seem to think it's going to be a post-apocalyptic wasteland with like roving bands of zombies or something. No, 10 years will go by and we'll be back into whatever system we are. But something is definitely coming. And I believe that's what Eric Weinstein is trying to say when he says, in 2019, I think the political world is coming apart. But I do want to make some important distinctions. In finance, things will change, but so long as society is cohesive, it can rebound. We've seen many depressions. But when it comes to politics, these things kind of escalate to violence and things that can be really dangerous. But Eric Weinstein was asked, what does coming apart mean in this view? And he said, the political world coming apart means an essentially complete inability to agree what happened, what is happening, and what must happen. The two things that are still working well are maintenance, e.g. the grid, banking, and traffic still work for now, and relative nonviolence. But I'll stop there and add a caveat as well. I think you should say relative maintenance, because we have seen many people getting removed from public discourse, banned on YouTube, and censorship has dramatically escalated, as well as the double standards, which we'll get into. One of which, just to give you a reference, is the Daily Beast published the name of a man who made a meme, or allegedly made a meme. We don't even know if he did. That was totally fine by journalism and Twitter standards. James OKeefe published the name of a woman who was censoring a conservative group on Pinterest. His video on YouTube was removed for privacy violations, and Twitter took down the tweet for privacy violations as well. A clear double standard in that there are the aristocrats and the peasants. Now, I know that peasant isn't the perfect way to describe it. There are certain groups that have technological and institutional control, and because of this, I would say maintenance is relatively working, but we are beginning to see cracks in the systems of banking. With, I published a story about the journalist who reached out to several banks, and then ultimately, a day later or so, we saw the Proud Boys, one of the Proud Boys, get his personal bank account shut down. So the grid is under attack. Will this escalate? I personally believe it will. And we've seen a dramatic escalation in the past few days with censorship. After the Vox adpocalypse, it's gotten way, way worse. The issue is that it's a massive shock to the system. If these things were happening very slowly, people probably wouldn't care. But it's happening so damn fast, people are going to start freaking out. But we'll see. Let's read on. Eric says, milkshaking, for example, is a performative rehearsal for something else. It's exploratory comic violence for now. Organized intersectional jury nullification will soon be tried to take down the justice system. It's a fast-acting cheap attack that cannot be easily countered. Well, let's do this. First, let's address the first point. Milkshaking, for example, is a performative rehearsal for something else. When you throw a milkshake at someone, what you're telling them is that they're exposed and they can do whatever they want to you. Now, of course, there are many people saying it's just a milkshake, it's silly, they're trying to humiliate you. But this also does expose the vulnerability that if these people want to go out and politic and talk to people, they are exposed, and it can get dangerous. And the rhetoric absolutely does escalate. Recently, a comedian, Joe Brand, said something to the effect that milkshakes were pathetic and why weren't people getting battery acid? I understand that that is meant to be a joke, right? But I also think it's extremely reckless because there have been many other people who have made similar jokes who have been attacked and defamed for doing so and banned. Now, Joe Brand is certainly getting it from conservatives right now. Nigel Farage criticized her because the joke may have crossed the line. Whether or not she actually wants someone to get battery acid and throw it is besides the point. The rhetoric is taking the step. Maybe it'll just be a joke, maybe it won't. But it starts with milkshakes. Milkshakes at first were a joke. They were a meme. Even Burger King got in on the joke. But then we saw a wave of milkshakings happen, and people started doing it. And now we see the escalation of the joke. Acid attacks are already a serious problem in the UK. I don't think it's a good idea to even joke about this because you are it's a step. It's incremental. But if you're a politician in the UK, you have to now be worried that they're joking about splashing acid on you. The second point that, we'll get back to that tweet in a second. The second point made by Eric Weinstein is intersectional jury nullification. Well, in this story from the New York Times, this man in Arizona helped some illegal immigrants. He provided them shelter at his camp, is my understanding. And a jury couldn't decide whether or not to convict him. And so it was a mistrial. I'm not saying this is a perfect example or anything like that. Mistrials absolutely happen. But jury nullification, for those that don't know, is when a juror decides not to convict because they feel that this person shouldn't be punished for what they did. And therein lies the problem. Did this man provide harbor and aid and shelter to an illegal immigrant? I believe the answer to that question is 100% yes. Everyone understands that. The question then becomes for the jury whether or not he actually committed a crime in doing so. And unfortunately, the jury could not agree. The government put on its best case with the full force of countless resources, and 12 jurors could not agree with that case. Mr. Warren read in a brief statement, "In the time since I was arrested in January 2018, no fewer than 88 bodies were recovered from the Arizona desert. The government's plan in the midst of this humanitarian crisis, policies to target undocumented people, refugees, and their families, prosecutions to criminalize humanitarian aid, kindness, and solidarity. Politically loaded language that falls on one side of the political debate. Was he aiding illegal immigrants entering the country, or was he providing humanitarian aid to refugees? The way you frame it will change how someone views the same screen." Again, to Scott Adams' point about two movies on the same screen. So again, it's not a perfect example. But I believe what Eric is getting at is that there will come a time where someone will say, I don't care if the person did or didn't do it. I don't want the government to have power over this group. And then we will see intersectional jury nullification. Weinstein goes on to say a rerun of 2008 or worse style crash would require skill, expertise, discretion, and will to counter. But most of all, trust and leadership. Yet there's not one single figure who commands trust at the moment. We put no one aside, no general or admiral, no one is above the fray. In the end, when people do not command respect, they're replaced by things. Anyone waving a gun will have our respect until we can disarm him. Similarly, the bar of gold, the Compromat video, the private key to the hard drive that was attacked with encryption, respect is transferred. But this hasn't much happened yet. Everything is still limping along. But we are using our time before what is next in the oddest of ways. Myself, most of all, I need to change that. I'm going to try, at least this time around, make up for 2008, be well. Make up for 2008. And I thought, what does Eric mean by this? And he's a very smart guy. He's not, the herald of truth and knowledge, but he is a smart guy, and he does bring good insight and wisdom. And I think what he's saying is he lost his conviction in 2005 because nothing happened, but then sure enough, 2008 did happen. There was a major financial crash, which was devastating. We're still here. Life carried on. But it may be that we're in the wake of this problem. Many of these young people, many people my age, millennials, following the financial crisis, struggled to find work. They went to school, their debt increased, and they still haven't necessarily recovered from this. The economy is better than ever. But that false start for many young people has left them saddled with debt. In response, many of them turned to socialism, and they turned to far left policy and agenda. And this paves the way for a fracturing in the American psyche. So let's do this. Who knows what's going to happen? I honestly don't. But I do think we will see escalation. That's all I can really predict, is that things will get worse because it hasn't gotten to the point where people have actually said enough. Even after Charlottesville, people have said, no, more. And they used that rhetoric to incense and to increase. We haven't seen a point at which both sides say we can't do this anymore. So I want to show some stories. The first, we have this one, which I already referenced, the man who was, it was a mistrial. Jurors couldn't decide. We saw the issue of the battery acid joke. Then we have this. The battery acid joke, now we're going to move into something I want to talk about in terms of the double standards and the two realities. Count Dankula made a joke on YouTube just to a small group of like his 12 subscribers. He got charged. He got arrested. He was convicted. And they actually took the money from his bank account. Why? Because he made a joke. This woman made a joke that was actually could be considered by some people offensive and a direct incitement to violence by saying milkshakes are pathetic. Where's the battery acid? It wasn't in that order. She said something about maybe I have the quote because I want to make sure I get it right. But she said something about throwing battery acid instead of milkshakes. And why bother with a milkshake when you could get some battery acids? And then went on to say, that's just me. I'm not going to do it, but I think milkshakes are pathetic. To me, it sounds like she's saying you're not doing enough. But what Dankula did with making his dog do a silly trick was arrestable. Let's move on. This is a really good example of one screen and two movies. Remember when Jim Acosta allegedly grabbed or was grabbed by the White House aide? This is a really simple example I can think of in the past year where people couldn't even see the same reality. Okay, we all saw the same video and no one knew what was real. Did the aide grab the microphone from Acosta, or did Acosta chop the arm of the aide? No one could agree. I mean, obviously you had two sides, one saying he did, one saying he didn't. But there were people saying, you're absolutely wrong. I don't understand. Are you nuts? He clearly hit her. And then the other people saying, what are you talking about? She's trying to yank the mic from him. And I don't understand how you can actually, there's no way to describe that situation to people. You will just have two sides saying, no, you are wrong, period, and nothing will change my mind. Now, this isn't that important. I don't think it really matters all that much whether or not, Acosta did or didn't put his arms on this woman. The situation, who cares? But it's a really good example of how, even with video in front of you, no one will agree. But let's move on. Some other stories. How about, as I mentioned earlier, the Daily Beast doxed a guy for just for posting a video of Nancy Pelosi. This was acceptable. In the media sphere, in journalism, they praised him for doing this. They were saying good job to this, I believe his name is Kevin Poulsen, for publishing the story and finding out who this guy was. It was a private citizen with no power who published a silly video of Nancy Pelosi, and they said it was newsworthy. But sure enough, what happens when James O'Keefe publishes an employee of a tech firm censoring a conservative group, which is newsworthy? This is a massive multi-billion-dollar corporation. Well, YouTube deleted his video, and Twitter deleted the tweet. I believe Twitter suspended his account. Clearly, we have two realities forming, where even though we have the journalist class and whatever they represent are fine with them using certain tactics and angry with other people. The way that Will Chamberlain of Human Events described it is aristocrats and peasants. And that's why he said Carlos Maza is allowed to incite violence, like the milkshaking thing, but you're not allowed to make fun of him. Crowder is a peasant. He's an outsider. He's not in the media class. So when he criticizes Maza, it's the worst of the worst offenses you could commit. But when Maza says go and throw milkshakes at people, not taken down by Twitter. So let's do another a little compare and contrast here. James O'Keefe, investigative journalism. We have uncovered Silicon Valley censorship. Suspended. Carlos Maza, take a milkshake and throw it at somebody. Totally fine. It's beyond just a double standard when it's the same circumstance. It even goes to the point where Carlos Maza can advocate for admittedly low-tier violence, but still physical conflict, and it's fine. Twitter won't take it down. This one might be my favorite. Today, or yesterday, we saw this story published by Jared Holt. Right-wing publications launder an anti-journalist smear campaign. The problem? Well, he's upset that Eowyn Lenihan, who at one point was a troll on Twitter, published this crime web connection of various journalists and their connections to Antifa. Now, I approached the story with a bit of a grain of salt and advised everyone else to do so as well, because basically what he did, apparently, was he found that many people on Twitter had connections with Antifa accounts. But that could just mean they're journalists tracking Antifa. In fact, many of the interactions could have been negative. One of these journalists could have said something like, I don't like you. And the insinuation simply because they have interacted that there is a collaboration between the two is incorrect. But I do think it's worth pointing out because I did highlight several of the journalists that I can confirm do work with Antifa. So, it is what it is. The point is, the CJR, the Columbia Journalism Review, publishes this story of outrage that no one fact-checked this data set. The data set clearly isn't real. There's no proof. And Jared Holt was upset because he reached out to Quillette. And Quillette said they wouldn't answer an activist's questions. They'd be willing to talk to a journalist. And so if they're going to publish this, they're essentially just another right-wing outlet laundering a smear campaign. But what's really funny about it is that the Columbia Journalism Review quite literally did the exact same thing. We talk about double standards a lot. And the reason I'm moving on to highlighting these stories is that I feel like this will absolutely precipitate some kind of escalation. What do you think's going to happen when conservatives see the evidence from James O'Keefe? Yes, a whistleblower came out and said straight up, they're 100% censoring the pro-life conservative argument. The evidence comes out, so Twitter and YouTube took his content down? Well, what can you do? It is a rapid development. It's not something that happens slowly over time. This is a massive shock very quickly. The Columbia Journalism Review in 2018 ran fake news. The Data and Society Alternative Influence Report had no data, no methodology, and it was quite literally just one woman who watched a bunch of YouTube videos and then drew lines between people. The rigorousness of this research, in fact, there's none. There's no research. It's quite literally someone who watched random videos and in the report drew lines between me and people I've never met before, and it actually said we collaborated, guested, or hosted. But that was verifiably false. I have never interacted with half the people she claimed I did. What happens when Eowyn Lenihan actually does see connections between journalists and Antifa? He jumps the gun on what it means, absolutely. I absolutely will criticize the publication, but at least there's some kind of methodology behind it, and it wasn't just one random person making random lines with a marker or something. Yet the Columbia Journalism Review views the world in such a way that their standards are, we can smear you, you better not smear us. Where do you think this goes? I don't care about the idea of a power differential or whatever. I just want to highlight plain as day, there is a dramatic divide, and it might not be left or right, I don't know how you describe it, but there are at least two growing factions who do not see the same world. Some who view they have a right to use certain tactics that others don't, but regardless, the split is there. It's not getting better, it is getting worse. Is Eric Weinstein right? I don't know. But he thinks there's going to be some kind of, that the political space is coming apart. What does that mean? I really don't know. But I do think it's going to get bad. People's livelihoods are already being affected. Their YouTube channels deleted. Their income is stripped from them. Their businesses were shut down by Chase. More than one person. Several people now. So I'll do a quick reference on Scott Adams' comment. Two movies on one screen. I don't necessarily want to read through his entire post, but I definitely wanted to, make sure I included his actual blog. And I think there's no better example of what he's talking about than the Jim Acosta situation. We all watched the same video, but we came to different conclusions, and nothing will change that. We'll move on now to some other points. This is another good example of two realities that we're living in, and the elitism and the snootiness of whatever. In this story from the Daily Wire, Ash Scow writes, Vox writer confused after Trump's tractor internet claims. Iowa senator sets the record straight. So I'll point this out. Aaron Rupar said, beyond parody, Fox Business cuts away from Trump's speech right after he laments bizarrely that tractors can't hook up to the internet. Many people quoted this tweet. You can see it's got 6,408 likes. And they started talking all this smack about Donald Trump, acting like how, they were so smart and they understood exactly what was being said. They will not have their minds changed no matter what. They do not exist in the same sphere. They are in a different reality. What ends up happening is, well, let me just clarify, they're wrong. Of course, Joni Ernst clarified, this may be news to folks in New York and DC, but in Iowa, we know internet-connected farm equipment is critical for precision agriculture. And it's one of the reasons why I'm working to improve rural broadband speeds across speeds and access. Trump's comment was in no way beyond parody. There's no real way to say that. The tractors should be connecting to the internet. Cars connect to the internet. My car from 2012 connects to the internet. They've had cell phones built into them for a long time. The Internet of Things is very common. Yet, we saw many people on the left running rampant with, I know better and nothing will change my mind. And this narrative makes people double down when Trump clearly said something that makes complete sense to the rural community and many conservatives and anybody who wanted to just look into it. This is normal. What we're seeing here with this situation is not ridiculous in that people in cities and urban areas often do misunderstand each other. But it's another example that I wanted to highlight. And we'll go on because I now want to get to why I think we are getting to the point where something may be happening. Something dangerous. Maybe a civil war. I don't know what you'd call it. In this interview from Brigham Young, we have a researcher, excuse me. Let me make sure I get his name right. It's a Brigham Young historian. And his name is Silber. I don't want to dig through here and find whatever. We're not going to deal with that. I just want to pull one quote. That's why. Silber says, it would have to be something else to call this a civil war. That would indicate a willingness on the part of the masses of people to engage in violence against their political enemies. That happened in the 1860s in part because people had come to see their political opponents in extreme, even demonic ways and found it impossible to find any middle ground. Maybe our politics and culture are moving in that direction, but I don't see it yet. Well, I would encourage Mr. Silber to follow any of the rhetoric of the culture war over the past few years. Some say it started with Gamergate. It hasn't stopped. It has only gotten worse over the past several years, and now we're at the point of mass censorship where even an investigative journalist like O'Keefe, whether you like him or not, had his content taken down for privacy violations, but the Daily Beast was allowed to stay up. Yes, there is a stark divide between people. Notch, the game developer who made Minecraft, tweeted several times actually, yup, the left is evil. Most on the left are not evil. They just think they're stuck there. Thinking they're stuck there also applies to the right, which will turn that evil to, in time, there are no sides. The idea that the left has become evil or is evil has been getting worse. And they actually say the same thing about Trump, but to a more absurd degree, referring to Trump supporters as a certain group of people from World War II that don't really exist anymore. They call everyone in the middle far right. And then sure enough, you see people who are moderate and to the right, conservative, calling the left evil. Not everybody, not all the time. But I'm highlighting this because this was a year ago. It's only getting worse. And I ask you, what do you think will happen when Trump wins a second term? Because he will. Trump is on track for a 2020 landslide. It's from March. Economic models point to a Trump blowout in 2020, but a faltering economy or giant scandal could change everything. And the story goes through several predictive models saying Trump is poised to win. I will say with the rapid escalation of censorship, it may backfire. It may actually help Trump. It's one thing when you slowly censor people and people question whether or not it's happening. But what we've seen over the past week has been one of the most dramatic escalations in censorship I've seen in the past several years. This can go two ways. Without Trump's main supporters and biggest voices online, yeah, he might lose. However, the high-profile takedowns might actually scare people. Political correctness is not a fun thing. And we've seen even Bill Maher criticize it. I've only got a couple more references I want to point out. The other one is just something I've mentioned in the past few videos I've done of the dramatic escalation and rapid development of intersectional ideology. The people who are fomenting the political collapse, whatever you want to call it, whatever it is, I don't know. Something is happening. We can all see it. And it's not getting better. It's just getting worse and fast. And that's just, it's getting worse and it's getting faster. It's getting worse and it's getting worse faster than before. The last thing I'll add to this is that many people might say that this is, it's been referred to me as inside baseball. A lot of people don't know what's going on. There's someone I follow by the name of Amanda the Jedi. She's a Twitch streamer, smaller YouTuber, 27,000 subs. She does YouTube content, movies, entertainment, games, sometimes political stuff, but not really. She recently made a comment on the YouTube smear against YouTubers, in which they implied Philip DeFranco was part of the pipeline to the far right. And when I saw her tweeting about this, I said, when you get smaller YouTubers who are not in the culture war tweeting about this, we can see it's expanding. It's pulling in more people. Beyond that, we saw a couple months ago, Rick and Morty creator Justin Roiland tweet about this university woman. He said extremism is bad no matter what ideology you adopt. However, while I would agree with Justin Roiland, he's clearly on one side of the culture war on this issue. Because the professor was talking about something having to do with, I don't know, what is it, whiteness? She says, when I hear a white person say this, I'm thinking, this is a dangerous white person. This is a white person who is going to need to deny my reality or something like that. That is intersectional ideology that is dominating the extreme left. Justin Roiland came out opposing that. Justin Roiland makes a TV show about a scientist and his grandson going on wacky adventures. Justin Roiland is not a culture warrior. He's not political. He makes jokes. But even Justin Roiland has been pulled into this. The point I'm trying to make with all of this video is that, when I saw Eric Weinstein's tweet about something happening, I completely agree. I don't know what it'll be like, how bad it will be, or what will come after, but it is going to happen. Imagine, I guess if you were to take Eric's word for it, something like the financial crisis, a dramatic upheaval that negatively impacts people for a couple of years, and we eventually move on with things being a little different. But I want to make sure I stress to Eric's point, I don't think millennials have actually recovered. I don't. The economy is doing well, but millennials aren't getting married, they're not having families, and they're living at home. These are remnants of the financial collapse. It has not been resolved. And what's happening from these kids living at home with no families and nothing to do, they're turning to socialism and far left ideology, saying the world is unfair, they did everything right, and it's still not enough. And I think that's why it's primarily millennials who are pushing this, and Gen Z is actually kind of flipping the other direction. It's because millennials came of age at a time when the economy was destroyed. And so now they're looking at the system as corrupt, indefensible, and in need of change. I don't think we're actually out of the financial collapse's woods yet. I think it's entirely possible that in 100 years they say, whatever period we're in right now started when the financial collapse happened, or the Great Recession. When in 2008, I remember trying to apply for a job, a dishwasher. I was, high school dropout, broke, and I needed whatever money I can get. And I went to this small hole-in-the-wall little restaurant, and the guy in front of me with his resume was wearing a suit. He was in his 30s, and he had lost his job, and he was going to take anything. Many of these jobs saw an opportunity to hire overqualified people or more qualified people as opposed to someone like me. And that put me off on a bad track. I ended up being homeless on and off. Ultimately, I pulled myself out, but most people didn't. Most of my friends live with their parents, and they're entering their 30s. I'm not exaggerating. I know a lot of people who live in apartments in big cities, but they're loaded with student loan debt. They can't find good work, and they're making trash wages. The economy may be doing really, really well, and maybe things will recover from here. But I think the Trump derangement syndrome is going to end with people not caring whether the economy is good or not. They're already angry. They've adopted this ideology. It's escalating extremely quickly, and it's going to come somewhere. It's going to come to something. I think we'll see violence. I think we're going to see businesses being destroyed. I don't think the culture war ends with us just slowly forgetting about it. I could be wrong. I'll leave it there. Long video. Let me know what you think, and we'll keep the conversation going. You can follow me on Minds at Timcast. Stay tuned. More videos coming up. YouTube.com/TimcastNews at 6 p.m. I'll see you there.